This round of applause for our candidates.
I'm like, it's just me. So
I spent 9 years uncomfortable in the council. This is
yeah, sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
Sorry.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I and my whānau, which means family and extended family, and all those who wish to join me here, and I and whakapapa, whakapapa means family and extended family and family tree, and all who wish to join me, we offer our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands around us, and whose sovereignty is not ceded. And we offer our respects to elders past and present. And we honour the mana. Mana means presence, it means living spirit, it means dignity and standing of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And we honour William Cooper, we honour the man, the Yorta Yorta man, William Cooper. May his memory be a blessing. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome all candidates. Welcome. All present, no matter where you're from, no matter which part of the world you are from, members of our community, our Rainbow Plus community and communities, welcome. And to the people behind the counters who are working here, you too, welcome. I now move to introduce the chairman of the meeting, John Fowler, who was former Mayor of South Sydney. Welcome, John.
I'm so glad that you can all come here. It's terrific because the issue is very much a local issue, and it's also a city issue, and inevitably it's a state issue, it's a gay issue, it's a local issue, it's a complex planning issue, and we have the 5 candidates from the 5 groupings on the ticket for the City of Sydney elections. We have 2 apologies from the Lord Mayor and from the candidate for the Yvonne Weldon Unite team, who are not approaching today, but the others are Jess Scully from Clover's ticket, Linda Scott from the ALP, Angela Masukas from the business group, if I can.
the small business party.
Thank you. Small business party. I wasn't quite sure whether people were parties or groups anymore because
We're a party group.
party group. Thank you very much. Okay, wake up. I think we have 5 party groups then. And then we have Karen Freyer from the Unite team, not United Australia. Thank you very much. It's very clear to make sure that point there. That's Yvonne Weldon's Unite team. And I'm sorry, the green ticket, which is Sylvie Ellsmith, which is the green ticket, and we have Sandra Sean. God, you can tell why I'm not in local government, can't you? Because I can't remember names. Thank you, Shauna Jarrett from the Liberal Party. So going from left to right, these are all of the candidates in the election for Lord. So Lord Mayor, some of them, and most of them are the number 2 in the ticket.
Thank you.
Welcome. There are 3 points in motions which are before the meeting, which are general collections of the thoughts of some of the issues. One of them is the global planning, the second one is the heritage and cultural aspect, and the third one is specifically a gay reference because of the importance of the gay community, which I think for the last 40 or 50 odd years has been quite significant in the area. So there's some of the very global issues which confront the planning of Oxford Street. The format today, which will be over 2 hours, is basically 5 minutes per ticket, of all the candidates, and then there will be time for questions after everyone has presented within the 5 minutes. And then once we discuss the first point on that, which I think I'll give to Sean to discuss, and then I'll introduce two other speakers on that first global planning resource.
Sean? Thank you. Can we have the other microphone, please?
Sean, do you want me to time keep?
It's not for a time.
If you wouldn't mind.
I
that
will
would be
wave my
terrific.
hands at 4 minutes, and then I will do this at 5.
That would be terrific. I was going to do that myself, but
And then?
if somebody else is timekeeping, that would be very good.
And then the ejector seat. Okay, thank you. Everybody, there's some papers here for you. Blue header. One is the agenda, and then there's some draft resolutions. The first question for the candidates, please. Oxford Street, where is it going? The City of Sydney has commissioned a floor space supply and demand study, and it concludes a lack of demand for commercial Oxford Street floor space, and it recommends keeping heritage and character. Who benefits from the building height increases along Oxford Street? What is the fate of the small streets in and around our communities? What happens to small business? Small business is the backbone of our communities. Ash Morgan recently received a lease for 99 years for 3 City of Sydney blocks. Those blocks are right next door to where we are now, and those blocks will be very important in terms of traffic going up onto the northern part of Taylor Square. North Taylor Square is right outside the window there, friends, and that's where the original 1978 is in 1978, was smashed by the police and the courts. But what they've done is lead the way in making this the LQBTQI Rainbow Plus capital, not only of Australia but of New Zealand as well. And then members of our community of friends, what we'll do in a minute, having gone through topic 1 on the agenda, is throw to Michael Dolk. Dolk, D-O-L-K it's spelled, Michael Dolk. And then Michael will talk about the narratives of his long experience and significant experience in and around Sturt Street and that part of Taylor Square, which is South Taylor Square, and the Oxford Street, whole Oxford Street community. And Michael Dolk, D-O-L-K, his contribution has been incredible because he has seen my knowledge go from 0 up to about just beginning to grasp the issue. So I now hand over to Michael Dolk, D-O-L-K. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Sean.
And welcome.
And 5 minutes for Michael. 5 minutes.
Yeah,
I will
okay.
give you a wave and then a big wave
Okay,
at 5.
thank you, thank you. I'm a resident from Sturt Street, just across the square, and we are represented here, I think, almost by 4/4 of the square, but not the law courts. But I'd really like to start talking about the planning controls for Council's planning proposal for the Oxford Street precinct. It's a very complex neighbourhood that's not well understood by Council and Council planners, but everybody agrees that something has to be done about Oxford Street. Now, before we get to the planning proposal in detail, I should point out that really it's comprised of, the usual planning proposals, the LEP as well as the DCP. And the problem here that we're trying to deal with is basically the LEP, the new height and FSR controls, the floor space ratio control. And in fact, the monster of the new LEP for Oxford Street is buried in the numbers and the scale of their impacts. Now, there are 3 distinct components to Council's plans for the proposed development of Oxford Street that overlap. First is the 99-year lease of Council properties on the north side of Oxford Street to Ash Morgan and Toga, reputedly for 60 million. Second is the planning proposal or master plan for Oxford Street itself. Most of it for the south side, all the way from Hyde Park to Queen Victoria Barracks. And this plan mimics, replicates and expands the scale of development of the north side. And third, of course, is Council's additional plan for Taylor Square with new tower options, which have been prompted by the recent acquisition of the Courthouse Hotel, Kinsellas and the buildings in between by Moelis, the Melbourne Property Investment Fund, and the Red Cape Hotel Management Outfit. Now, the first sale to Ashmorgan of its property on the north side is more or less a done deal, but no development has yet been approved for the site, and the proposal involves significant variation in the 2012 LEP planning controls, and is currently before the local planning panel, but has not yet been approved. So there's a lot of discussion that still can be had about the nature of that development. Most residents in the neighbourhood are dead against it. There's a lot more that can be said about it, and its impact on Foley Lane, which is where Sean lives. But I'll just have to leave that issue aside. Now, the main planning proposal, the master plan, mimics the Ashmorgan deal by adding 10 metres or more to all buildings on the south side of Oxford Street between Hyde Park and Greens Road in Paddington. That's a long way, a bit like the Great Wall of China heading up to Oxford Street. 10 metres allows for 2 floors of multi-purpose commercial floor space on top of every heritage listed or contributory building on Oxford Street. And then the question is, why 10 metres? The problem is that Council has endorsed this 10-metre formula for the LEP without considering any of the following. And I'll go through a list here. It's without considering the existing subdivision pattern as a constraint on the proposed scale of development, the fact that there are small terraces without independent access to upper floors from the front, so all access, including vehicle service access, will be from laneways at the rear. Second, without considering the different scale, character and business uses of different buildings and blocks on Oxford Street. 3, without considering the different pattern of development east and west of Taylor Square. 4, without conducting any studies evaluating the impacts of development, such as solar access studies and traffic impact studies on rear laneways. In fact, the 10-metre formula can be demonstrated to result in non-DCP compliant development, and that's true of Sturt Street as well as other areas here along the south side. 5, without considering the impact on small business operating in Oxford Street, particularly marginal creative and culture business, but really any small business without restaurants and the local butcher. 6, without considering the impact on Topshop residential use and social housing in Oxford Street, as well as on adjacent residential uses. 7, without considering any of the recommendations of the study service commission for the proposal. There is, for instance, a complete lack of correspondence between the findings of Council's engagement report of 2020, which confirmed popular support for the cultural and creative precinct, and the actual LEP planning controls. 9, the planning proposal ignores the detailed Curio heritage study, which recommends to add a large number of buildings to the existing heritage listed buildings, the list. In fact, the planning proposal preempts any possibility of Council following due process in listing heritage assets by slating these for redevelopment in advance. 10, without considering the heritage conservation strategy for, I could go on, and I will go on until number 14, because ultimately it also contradicts Clover Moore's own statements on heritage.
Keep on finishing to you.
I will just say one more sentence, which is that the rest of this text will be published and be available to everybody. So thank you very much.
The questioning for candidates is to invite candidates to topic 1 on the agenda, and maybe one way of summarising it is, candidates, are you for or against the 10-metre concrete canyon along Oxford Street? And we now throw to the candidates.
I think just before we get to very nitty-gritty planning issues, and I think just the impacts of Michael's motions and the issues that are concerned, it's quite complex. It's not just a simplicity of like no height limits or no this, because these are all proposals that are going to be in front of Council now that there's already some intention, because as soon as a developer sees something, possibility of a draft DCP, that is an intention which has been indicated by Council and can be contestable in law. So,
excuse me, I want to get to this really quickly, but the agenda says that each of the candidates would make a 5-minute.
That's right, and that's happening now. I'm just saying how incredibly complex it is.
I agree.
The issues are not as simple as height limits.
Yeah.
On that note, I will start. We didn't do any tossing, but as people are sitting there, should we go in the line of the ticket? I don't know what's the first call here for the ticket. Angela, is it?
Yeah.
Go, Angela, thank you. I think if people could tell me with the ticket, I'll go by the ticket.
It's going to go alphabetical then. I won't need that.
Thank you. 5 minutes, Angela, and thank you for your time.
Not at all, not at all. I'll do this. Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming on this wet afternoon, but it's a very important time. We're just a few days out on one of the most momentous occasions that the City of Sydney has seen for several years now, and that's the upcoming election. I'm Angela Vithulkas. I'm serving my second term as a councillor and I've been elected since 2012. I'm a City of Sydney resident, a very proud small business owner of more than 35 years in the City of Sydney. I've employed hundreds of people and owned and operated more than 24 businesses locally. I'm also the founder and leader of the Small Business Party. I caught my first shoplifter at the age of 3, so I think it's safe to say that small business is in my blood. As a councillor, I receive a lot of communications from our local residents and small business owners. The majority carry the same message. They ask the question of why. Why is council treating us this way? Why isn't council listening to our concerns? Who makes the dumb decisions at council? Why aren't we consulted? These comments and the spirit of them carry through regardless of the topic, of the neighbourhood or the community group. But on this matter, the Oxford Street planning proposal, the emails were different. The local people who wrote to me were worried about their future and scared that they were going to be ignored. And they said they felt powerless. And that made me worried. This is a quote from one of the emails. It seems regardless of what we say, it's falling on deaf ears. Which councillor is able to stand up for the little people, for the local residents and the small business owners? End quote. When I spoke to them, and yes, that involves a telephone call from one human being to another, I also offered to go out and see them and to look at these issues for myself. Little did I know the tsunami that was about to descend upon me. But more about that later. On the 15th of November, I tabled a petition in council signed by over 400 people, and I understand that now that's well up to 500, from people from this local community who wanted to have their views heard on the Oxford Street planning proposal. On the same day, I also tabled a notice of motion that highlighted the concerns of the petition and allowed for let's say, quite a robust debate in chambers. My decision to run for a third term in council and to put my hand up for Lord Mayor came from the very first-hand experience of the broken process of council and how bad it is for our people, but also for our councillors, or at least the ones who care and don't have to toe a party line. The Oxford Street planning proposal is the perfect example of this process that somehow leaves out the very people it could impact. When I tabled this petition and the notice of motion, I was told by the Lord Mayor in that meeting that what I was doing was illegal. And members of her team called me confused, that I didn't understand the community. It's on Facebook and it's in reply to their concerns. For this, I will need my glasses. As set out on page 5 of the city's community participation plan, all submissions we received during the exhibition period will be considered by staff, addressed and summarised in the ultimate report to council. Here's my favourite part. Where staff consider it appropriate, changes will be made to the recommendation that are presented to councillors. Councillors will then consider the staff recommendations in the context of all the material before them. End quote. And I have the letter with me. I was told that I could be in breach of code of conduct by discussing this with the community, that it showed my bias on my part and that I could not maintain a fair perspective and that I was revealing how I would vote. Well, that's not how I work, and it's not what I was elected to do, and it certainly isn't part of my values to ignore people's views. I have not made a decision on how I will vote on this proposal, should I be re-elected and part of the new council. I made a decision to listen, to view it in person, to consider more fully what this proposal would mean. I did not make a decision to only listen to what staff think I should do. and then vote the way they recommend. If this is a breach of code of conduct, then so be it. The city has done a lot of good work, and I'm proud to have been part of that for the past 9 years. Proud that I've been able to make contributions based on a fair, balanced, and informed perspective. I owe that to my small business common sense approach. But the city does not do well in community consultation, and
That's
that's
5
called
minutes.
customer service. The current system relies on how hard it can be for our people to speak up on policies and decisions. And you have to find a sympathetic councillor who's willing to breach the code of conduct if you want to have your views heard. At this election, make a difference your way.
Thanks very much, Angela. And I know that all of you know how the ticket goes, and I haven't paid very much attention to it, so you'll have to tell me who's next.
Is it on next? Yeah.
Is it? Thank you. Someone should know the numbers on this game, because it's all a matter of numbers when you vote. The next candidate comes from the Unite for Sydney campaign, which is headed by Yvonne Weldon. Karen is the number 2 on the ticket.
Hi. I'm sorry Yvonne's not here. She's on hold today and she's asked me to step in. I'm Karen Fryer and I'm number 2 on the ticket. Thank you, Sean and John and all the other people who put so much effort into organising today's event. I'd also like to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to the elders both past and present. Oh, can you hear me?
It's very soft.
I'm so sorry. I've got these glasses that are sort of like, it's really a sort of short sighted and can't see everything. It's difficult to overstate the symbolic importance of Oxford Street to Sydney's gay community. It is where in 1978 protesters marched out of the bars and into the streets calling for an end to discrimination, incurring 53 arrests. The Mardi Gras parade began the following year, and since then Oxford Street and its surrounding neighbourhoods have long been recognised in Australia and internationally as the heart and home of Sydney's LQBTQI+ communities. Oxford Street is also one of Sydney's earliest main streets, and it follows an ancient pathway used by the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. But the strip has lost its sparkle. It's decaying. There's a high level of retail vacancy, and our much-loved Oxford Street is losing its special character. Despite the tireless efforts of local residents and business owners like Ken Holmes of Aussie Boys, Sue Ritchie of the Beach and Hotel, and the Darlinghurst Business Partnership. There have been many reasons posited as to why Oxford Street has lost its pulse. The lockout laws, the creation of clearways, the construction of Westfield Shopping Centre and Bondi Junction and the CBD, and now even COVID. But it's hard to ignore there's been one constant throughout this period. Clover Moore has been Lord Mayor of Sydney for over 17 years. Clover Moore has been one of Oxford Street's most significant landlords, including managing the T2 building, which has since been sold off. Clover Moore has, for over a decade, commissioned countless consultations and numerous reports trying to get to the bottom of why Oxford Street is failing. Let me read you one quote from one such report, signed off by Clover in 2008, which said, the precinct had lost its mojo. 13 years later, and I would say Oxford Street still doesn't have its mojo. But we do have another report from Clover. This one is recommending we allow Ash Morgan and other developers to add 2 floors to each site. Sure, there are requirements for additional creative spaces, activation of street frontage and preservation of heritage elements, but I'm just not convinced this will work. there'll be considerable overshadowing. There's no requirement to preserve the LGBTQI plus heritage of the strip. There's no overall vision for Oxford Street. None of our team promised to have all the answers, but what we can promise is that if we're elected, we will consult with the LGBTQI plus community on all matters where the community may be affected by creating a rainbow advisory committee. Thank you, Alice. We will set up a permanent Pride Museum on Oxford Street. We will work to make Oxford Street the natural place for all Sydney-siders to dance, eat, drink and watch shows. A street that remembers and retains its gay heritage and welcomes the next generation of LGBTQI plus residents. Reinvigorating Oxford Street isn't an impossibility, just as it isn't an impossibility for Sydney to vote in Australia's first ever Aboriginal Lord Mayor. Imagine that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. And the next one is on the ballot paper, I should say.
think it's
So
Sylvie.
surprised.
I don't know.
Larry will
I
know.
just wanna-
Yeah.
Well, no clone was last, so this should
Yeah.
go last.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, that's good.
the Liberal Party, Shauna.
I'll sit down. Is this working? Can you
Yeah.
hear me? Yeah. I'll sit down rather than stand up. I'll stand up all day at work. I'm Shauna Jarrett and I'm the Liberal candidate for the Lord Mayor of Sydney, and my number 2, Lyndon Gannon, is here with me today. We all come in numbers to support each other in what we're trying to achieve. I'd like to acknowledge Sean and John for organising it and acknowledge the country on which we are actually having this event. Sydney Liberals support communities such as the group here today, the LGBTI community, the businesses that they run and support, local residents, ratepayers, and importantly, your revitalisation of the Oxford Street precinct. So it once again can become vibrant, edgy, and yet sustainable. And by that I mean both economically and from a heritage perspective. We want Oxford Street to be known as it once was, locally, nationally and internationally, as a place for people to express themselves and have it recognised as the sole place of an important part of Sydney and Australia's embracing of our LGBTI friends and family. Yet the revitalisation must be done in an economically sustainable way. Oxford Street has to be able to ride out the vicissitudes of economies, pandemics, population changes, changes in what's fashionable, changes in what is culture, changes in what are arts, food, and all the small businesses and services that support the changes that an area in a city goes through. Council needs to be able to enable the locals to adopt and adapt, not impose what they think is best. I think we've seen Oxford Street overplanned quite a few times since it first arose as a centre of Sydney. Sydney Liberals want to see a publicly available register of council-owned properties so that the community, small businesses, creatives and entrepreneurs can develop local plans whilst working with state government with respect to transport routes, because it is a major transport route, Oxford Street, with the council with respect to parking and the other services that are needed to support all the types of enterprises that can rekindle the life and vibrancy of this precinct. A lot less red tape, listening to what John was saying, LEPs, DCPs, XYZPs, all sorts of other plans. Cut through all of that to enable creative businesses and you as locals want and need, and also acknowledge that this is an area with the LGBTI community that is connected nationally and internationally. And Oxford Street can be and should be a precinct for all of the needs and wants of that enormously wonderful, vibrant community and those of us who enjoy the benefits that come with it. We are committed to what our museum has done down the road, telling some fabulous stories of Australia's scientific and cultural heritage. And we will fight to see the revitalisation of Taylor Square way before 2050, as we heard the other night. We believe in diversity, independence, and getting government out of your face. So I ask you to support Sydney Liberals to ensure that there's a diversity around the council table after the upcoming elections. And I really look forward to listening to you and your ideas and plans for Oxford Street.
The next person on the ticket should be Linda Scott. Thank you for the ALP.
Thank you. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that we meet today on the land of the Gadigal people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And thank you very much to John, thank you to Sean, and I know many of you who have organised this event today for taking your time and doing that, and also Jenny Leong, our Newtown MP, great to see you here too. Oxford Street has a very significant history. It's not a history of heritage or planning. It's a history of sex. It's a history of love. It's a history of where people could come, sometimes the only place in the world where people could come and feel safe. And that is the history that we must hold on to here in Oxford Street. As I'm sure many of you have experienced, I grew up in a family that was actually pretty progressive. I moved overseas to be an exchange student into a very conservative part of the United States, and for the first time in my life was faced with real exposure to extraordinary discrimination. In a local election that was on there when I was a teenager, there were TV advertisements advocating for banning literature in public libraries about the gay community. It shouldn't even be able to be read about, was what they said on television. This is why Oxford Street was formed, because people could come here, the only place perhaps in Australia, in some cases for communities, the only places of many few in the world to feel safe. So that's what we're trying to hold on to here in Oxford Street. Sydney Labor wants to hold on to that history. My predecessor, Meredith Bergman, was one of the 78ers. My other predecessor, Verity Firth, fought for years to get that rainbow flag built on the city before she moved into state parliament. We have a strong Labor history of supporting this community, and this is what the future of Oxford Street should look like. It's important to have that reflected in the planning controls. Unlike the Liberals, I believe in planning controls. I don't believe in complete deregulation. I don't think that's the right thing for the future here in Oxford Street. But what I do also know is that this is about so much more than just planning controls. It's about making sure that the different histories of Oxford Street are reflected, that the Paddington end of Oxford Street is actually completely different to 3 Saints Square, which is actually completely different to the other end of Oxford Street down near the CBD, and that there are stories all along the way. It's why I fought so hard on council to turn T2 into a museum. It's why I moved to successfully get the city to archive and store documents and remnants of the community for the future. It's why I've worked with St Vincent's Hospital to preserve one of their HIV wards for a future museum. And it's why I've worked with the community organisations that are pushing so hard to get a museum here in Oxford Street. Sydney Labor doesn't support it alone. We've practically worked to save the history of this area to make sure it's full and tells the rich story. Unfortunately, we all know The T2 building was turned into a failed bike hub and then sold off. I am devastated about that, but that is where we are. And so you're going to need candidates for the future. You're going to need a mayor who's worked hard and committed to finding a space in the future for a museum to tell the history of this place. You're going to need a Lord Mayor who understands the different parts of Oxford Street, the different stories, and ensures that the planning controls reflect those differences. In some parts of Oxford Street, it is going to be the case that communities will accept balconies instead of height. In some parts of Oxford Street, it is going to be the case that communities will accept height. And in some parts of Oxford Street, it is the case that it's a highly residential area and that overdevelopment is inappropriate. As has been said, these are complex, nuanced decisions, and you're going to need a Lord Mayor for the future, full of energy, who cares about the future and who work with communities to deliver all these different results for a better Oxford Street for the future. Thank you.
The next candidate is for the Greens.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? Hi, my name is Sylvie Elsmore. I'm very proud to be the Greens lead candidate for the City of Sydney Council elections, and I'd like to also acknowledge that Mark is taking a photo at the moment. Mark Smith is also on our ticket. Give us a wave, Mark. Hello. And thanks, Sean, for your acknowledgement of country. I'm very proud to have been born and lived my whole life on Gadigal country, Aboriginal country, for which sovereignty was never ceded. And so, for those of you who don't know me, my background's in cultural heritage, working for environmental organisations, community organisations, and I was a Marrickville councillor representing Newtown, so jointly looking after King Street with the City of Sydney Council. When we've been talking to people about what they want for the City of Sydney Council in the coming years, the things we've been hearing are around the city becoming less equal, becoming less grassroots, about housing affordability and about climate action. And acknowledging that there are many strong things about our communities in the city, but that people are concerned that the city's not stepping up to take the challenges that we have seriously, particularly around who gets to live in the city and whether or not who it's a safe space for, who it's an inclusive space for. So when we think about a space like Oxford Street and this place, which has always been a safe place for people to come because of the community here, and the community has had to fight so hard for that right, there's a consensus amongst all the candidates around, okay, we need to have a real space that is celebrating that history and keeping it alive that people want to come to visit. There is consensus, I believe, about support for a Pride Centre or museum. The Greens believe that the role of council is to build things with the community in partnership with the community. That too much about the future of how our city is shaped relies on developers with very poor planning laws about returning any of the windfall gains that they get back to the community. And important community assets like a Pride Museum need to be directly built with council or invested by council because they need to be protected forever. And the only way to do that is to keep them in public hands. There's also consensus, I think, on this panel that we need to better celebrate the future and the past heritage of this rainbow community. But what concerns me about the plans and what concerns the Greens generally about these big plans for renewal of spaces that rely on developers being able to add a couple of stories and make a huge amount of money is why the focus is not on how do we keep a living rainbow community here. This place will not be inclusive and welcoming for the future if all we're looking at doing is protecting heritage and plaques on the street and say, look what was once achieved because of the people that made this place wonderful. So one of the things we've been focusing on and that we're quite excited because there seems to be a lot of conversations about how we can do more in affordable housing is a specific plan for the city to step in and protect affordable housing that's still here and be building public and affordable housing. So if we're going to talk about more density, we need to be talking about targets of 50% or more of that being housing that is going to protect communities that are being forced out of this area and able to live here. Co-ops for the young fellows who come to this place to be safe and have left their families because they weren't protected and they need somewhere to live and there's nowhere for them to live here. And there's going to be less of those spaces. So that's the conversation we want to have. We know there's really important things we need to do about protecting heritage frontages, the fact that one side of Paddington, if you're in Wallara Council, has massively better heritage protection for the buildings than on the City of Sydney side, for example. There is so much more we can do. But for me, when I think about when we're trying to build the city for the future and protect the things that we care about and to have an inclusive city, it's got to be about the communities that get to live here. And the priority should be on how do we protect Rainbow Oxford Street. And that cannot be a development-driven agenda. It needs to be an agenda that is driven by council on behalf of everyone in partnership with the community. Thank you.
And the last candidate for today's question time, which will follow afterwards, is Jess Scully from the Clover Street.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John, and thank you everyone for being here. I also want to acknowledge that we're meeting today on Gadigal land and to extend my respect to elders past and present of the Eora Nation. And I want to also acknowledge Jenny Leong, the MP for Newtown, for being here as well. Thank you for bringing us together to have this conversation today. I'm very glad that I could be here today to represent the Lord Mayor. Unfortunately, she's at another community event this afternoon, so she wasn't able to make it. But I'm glad that I could be here because I have loved Oxford Street for a very, very long time. And I've been proud to be a voice for Oxford Street as well on the Sydney City Council for the past 5 years and for the last 2 years as Deputy Lord Mayor. You know, we're all here because we love Oxford Street and we all have our own memories and attachments and relationships that were built in this place. You know, for many people, it was a place of safety and refuge, the first port of call when they came here from everywhere else in Australia or the world, a place that they knew that they would be welcomed. It was a place where you could really dive into the creative culture of Sydney. You know, and that's something I've been involved in the last 20 years working in the creative sector. I love Oxford Street, but Oxford Street has had a really rough decade. And I think we have to start, when we're talking about the future of Oxford Street, from a place of reality, about what we've been through on Oxford Street for the past decade, right? So we all remember that the lockout laws were introduced in 2014. They were introduced by the Liberal government and they were supported by the ALP. And only Jamie Parker, MP for Balmain, for the Greens, and Alex Greenwich, the MP for Sydney, voted against the lockout laws. But even before that, back in 2008, this very bar, Arc, Stonewall, the Exchange Hotel, they were the subject of the lockout laws that were introduced by Nathan Rees for specific venues, including this very venue. Now, we cannot overstate the impact that those lockout laws have had on the entertainment and nightlife precinct here on Oxford Street and the flow-on effects for other small businesses in the area, like the incredible newsagent that I know in the media we used to live and die looking at, what had come into the magazine racks in that incredible newsagent across the road. All of those businesses have been incredibly impacted by the lockout laws. And then a month after the lockout laws were repealed, after a huge community campaign, the lockdowns came into effect 1 month later. It has been 2 incredibly hard years following the repeal of the lockouts for entertainment and nightlife on Oxford Street. So let's start from that point of reality when we decide how we're going to rebuild an Oxford Street that we can all be excited about for the future. And that's why I'm really proud of what the City of Sydney is proposing. And I think there's a lot that we can draw from it and that hopefully after consideration of community feedback that we might be able to support. Let me tell you what we've got in store for Oxford Street. Here's what's on the cards. There are strategic interventions to ensure long-term investment in Oxford Street, right? Not everything can be done by the public sector. Yes, the City of Sydney has been a significant landowner on Oxford Street, but we need private sector investment as well to unlock the potential of Oxford Street, to bring really great creative precinct curation and management to this place. We're seeing a growth of incredible boutique hotels up and down Oxford Street. That's going to be a huge bonus for this area. It's also a reason why the Oxford Street Planning Controls propose a 10% bonus in floor space if you dedicate that percentage to creative and cultural outcomes. Now that is really important, and not only that,
It also provides bonus floor space for everything that takes place in a basement. So whether that is a sex on premises venue or a theatre or a nightclub, that is bonus floor space for a cultural or creative outcome. And that is one of the creative and cultural outcomes the community have given us feedback and told us that's an important part of the sexually and gender diverse community here on Oxford Street. The other thing I'm really excited about is the way that our planning controls for this new precinct require the maintenance of 1,600 square metres of creative space that the city has been providing since 2011. More than 2,100 artists and creatives have used those creative spaces here on Foley Lane and on Oxford Street, and they have contributed to the creative vitality of the area. I'm also really excited about the plans for the National Art School. That's going to be a huge bonus for this area. Just lastly, because I know I'm running out of time, you know, one thing I'm really excited about as well is the investment we're making in demonstrating the history of this place, and particularly the AIDS memorial that's coming for the Green Park. You know, I brought that to the council, and I can't wait to see that living history represented here, and it's a really important part of the future of Oxford Street as well. Thank you.
You've heard 5 different takes on the future things that can be proposed by the different party groupings, and there's now a chance for questions from the candidates. So the questions will be limited, the response and the question to 3 minutes. So I can see one from the very well conducted timekeeper.
Yeah, and then here.
Question, oh, I don't think this is on. I'll just shout. My name's Alice Anderson. I'm a tenant of City West Housing, so I've personally benefited from affordable housing. What is each candidate's plan for affordable and social housing, and how to ensure that it is queer friendly and people do not get discriminated on sexual preference or gender identity? Is it 3 minutes per candidate response? That's a lot of time.
I don't think
It's a long time.
I don't think so. I mean, I think
What time do you
think
want?
we
No
can
time?
limit the topic to 3 minutes.
Okay.
That's my point.
I'm really proud at the City of Sydney. We have supported an enormous amount of affordable housing across the city. We have more in the pipeline. We've been huge supporters of City West, of St George Community Housing, who created the Foyer model, implemented the Foyer model here, which is all about supporting young people coming from out-of-home care, as well as important institutions like Common Ground that we've supported. So it's really important that we continue to do everything we can to ensure more affordable housing in the city. And of course, investing in things like we have an identified position for an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff member.
Okay, good. We have another candidate, please.
Okay. Thanks, Alice.
It's not working.
Thanks, Alice. Labor has a very clear plan for more affordable housing in the city, including doubling the current diverse and affordable housing fund, which is something the Lord Mayor has voted against. Also building another Common Ground or equivalent facility. For those of you that don't know, it's a several 100-person dwelling in Camperdown to support people transitioning from sleeping rough back into the city, and indeed using our development controls to deliver more affordable housing right across the city, so that it can be the case that normal working people can live in the City of Sydney and one day aspire to own a house here, something that was achievable within my lifetime.
Okay, if you could just go down with each person down to the topic, if you'd like to add to it or pass it through.
Thank you. I think affordable and social housing is very important to the fabric of the community. It's policy, it's planning policy with council, it's making sure that there's adequate funding there, it's supporting some great initiatives. It's also about dealing with the right kind of providers who are also going to have, as part of their policies, protections and support for the diverse communities. It's also very important to plan for the future for that, so it shouldn't be ad hoc. Right now with council, while there is some funding, it does feel very ad hoc, and it shouldn't be like that. It should be a long-term plan.
Does this work?
Yeah.
Affordable housing, no-brainer. You need to think about what sort of a Sydney do we want to create for our children and our children's children. Is it a city that's just for the rich, or is it a city that's also for the people who teach our children, who put out our fires, who treat us when we're sick. I also just want to point to a couple of statistics really quickly, because I think that we need to, one of my frustrations is that there's a lot of talk, but there's very little delivery. So, for example, if we look at the amount of affordable housing, there were 447 affordable dwellings when Clover first came into power 17 years ago. 17 years on, we only have just over 1,000. That's not even 1/10 that they promised in 2020. Let me just to finish that point. To that point, I'm just sick of the talk. I think it's time that there's actual delivery on these promises.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Look, the issue is housing, and it's ironic that everybody has a very motherhood statement on housing, but they've just given away 3 blocks.
They're closing it down here on Oxford Street.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
Let's be real.
Michael, please.
Let's be real.
Yes, I think there's a question of reality. You've just got to document, as I've said before, it's going to be legal at the courts, which is a draft DCP and LEP, and you're talking about boutique hotels. I mean, I think the issue is...
Albion House over there, right across the street, there are people living there.
Michael, I order, please, sit down. So there's a question here.
Can we hear the other 2 candidates?
I'm sorry, but the issue of housing is a generally important issue. I think it's not specifically, I don't think it's specifically related.
Finished. It was the question.
Get on with it. Thank you.
This is clearly, I'm just going to project. There's lots of really important issues, so I'll be really quick. The Greens do have a costed plan that's available, and I won't go into the details, it's available on our website, where we can deliver 5 times as much affordable housing as the city has delivered in the past 17 years while improving council's bottom line. And I think it's important to acknowledge that people want to live in lots of different kinds of housing. Grants to social housing is okay, but the reason I mentioned co-ops earlier, we need to talk about how older people are able to keep living in the city. You need a housing plan that says there's communities that live here and want to live a particular way and live together, and we should be investing with them to help them do that. We have a costed plan to do that, and I'm very happy to go into the details after, but I think there's lots of other questions people want answered right now.
Thank you, Sylvie. Yes, good.
I don't know if this is working, so I'm just going to
sorry. I think as a lot of people across here have pointed out, council has plan after plan after plan. It's about making those plans happen. Yes, there is social and affordable housing that is required, there are plans for it. The council should actually work to fulfil those plans to enable all of us to live, work, play and enjoy the city here. For example, there are units in the buildings down Oxford Street here which council could have restored 20 years ago and given them to people to live here. Stop talking and expect things to start.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and there's a question over.
Question there.
Kia ora. A question here. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, please.
I'm Mark Watson. I'm perhaps a typical user of Taylor Square as a gay man who's been going out to Oxford Street for many years. And I've seen Taylor Square change